Imagine being in prison and still producing some of the most powerful ideas that would change the way we think about culture and politics. That was Antonio Gramsci, an Italian Marxist philosopher, writer, linguist, and politician. Born in 1891, Gramsci became a founding member and leader of the Communist Party of Italy. His opposition to Mussolini's fascism in 1926 led to his imprisonment, where he remained until his death in 1937. But here's the astonishing part. Despite being confined, he filled over 30 notebooks and wrote around 3,000 pages on politics, culture, philosophy, and history. These later became known as the prison notebooks, and they are considered one of the most original contributions to modern political thought. And remember this carefully, it was asked in exam. Prison notebooks deal with philosophy, culture, literature, and intellectuals, not with personal or colonial suffering. Now pause here and note this: Gramsci rejected mechanical materialism and developed what he called the philosophy of praxis, asked in exam. Simply put, this means that theory must always be linked with practice, with revolutionary action. For him, Marxism wasn't just a reflection of an external reality. It was a living, evolving process, rooted in human history and struggle. But his most famous idea, the one you must remember for exams, is cultural hegemony. Instead of ruling only through force, through police, prisons, or the military, the bourgeoisie also secured power by winning consent. They used cultural institutions, schools, churches, media, literature to make their worldview seem natural and common sense. Yet, Gramsci stressed this hegemony was never absolute. Subordinated groups, workers, women, colonized peoples could resist and reshape culture. This turned culture into a site of political struggle, and this insight became foundational for later cultural studies. Now here's another important point, asked in exam, Gramsci's idea of organic intellectuals. He argued that every social group produces its own intellectuals who speak its worldview and give it coherence. These organic intellectuals challenge the monopoly long held by traditional elites like the clergy. In this way, intellectuals are not neutral thinkers, they are active agents of social transformation. Gramsci's reach was vast. In the prison notebooks, he reflected on nationalism, the French Revolution, fascism, Fordism, folklore, religion, and the dynamics of high and popular culture. His theories later influenced pioneers of cultural studies like Richard Hoggart and Raymond Williams, who, as you should remember, were asked in exam the first to revalue the masses as legitimate subjects of cultural study. So, when you think of Gramsci, anchor these key ideas in your memory: philosophy of praxis, cultural hegemony, organic intellectuals, and the legacy of the prison notebooks. Together, they remind us that power doesn't just operate through coercion, it works through culture, through consent, and through the everyday practices of society. Think about how your favorite food, a fashion trend, or even the music you listen to often comes from across the world. That's globalization in action, the movement of goods, ideas, and cultural forms across borders. In recent decades, globalization has become one of the defining features of capitalism's worldwide expansion. But here's the key. Cultural studies reminds us that globalization is not just a one-way flow of Western dominance. Instead, it is a contested process where local communities negotiate, adapt, and sometimes resist global pressures. Pause here and note this. Cultural studies rejects elitism. It treats culture as political, not simply aesthetic or canon-bound, and this has been asked in exam. That means culture isn't just Shakespeare and museums, it's also street food, pop music, hairstyles, and the everyday practices that shape identity. Now let's shift to cultural consumption. Traditionally, the consumer was seen as passive, just soaking up whatever media was given. But thinkers like Stuart Hall and John Fiske challenged that. They showed that audiences actively read, reinterpret, and sometimes resist dominant messages. Watching television or listening to a song isn't a neutral act. It's shaped by class, race, gender, and social status. This recognition that consumption itself reflects identity and power has been asked in exam. Cultural studies also widen the idea of what counts as a text. Through semiotics, films, television shows, photographs, fashion, and even hairstyles are all read as cultural text. So the texts of culture include both high art and ordinary life. This expanded view insists that culture must be understood in networks of meaning, not just within isolated national boundaries, another point asked in exam. Can you recall the foundational works that anchored this field? Richard Hoggart's The Uses of Literacy, Raymond Williams's Culture and Society and the Long Revolution, and E.P. Thompson's The Making of the English Working Class. And here's one that has been asked in exam, Dick Hebdige's Subculture, The Meaning of Style from 1979, which explored youth subcultures and style as resistance. Building on this Marxist foundation, Pierre Bourdieu brought in sociology, using statistics and interviews to study taste and cultural distinction. Terry Eagleton, while appreciating cultural studies, critiqued its limits in After Theory from 2003. Later, contributions kept pushing the field further. Graham Turner stressed that ideology is the most vital concept in cultural studies. Yes, that's asked in exam. Graham Dawson and Al Thompson introduced the idea of the cultural circuit in memory studies and oral history, also asked in exam. This model highlights how culture is always in motion through production, circulation, consumption, and lived memory. When we talk about the rise of cultural studies, it's not just about big names like Raymond Williams or Stuart Hall, and not just about institutions like the Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies. The field also grew through its journal spaces where scholars could debate, experiment, and expand the meaning of culture. Pause here and mark this. One of the earliest and most important journals was the Bowling Green Journal, first published in 1969, asked in exam. What made it groundbreaking was its focus on popular culture. Instead of privileging high art or elite literature, it took comics, rock music, detective films, and everyday entertainment seriously. By doing this, it challenged the hierarchy of high versus low culture and helped legitimize cultural forms that were once dismissed as trivial. As the decades passed, many more journals emerged, widening the field and bringing in fresh perspectives. Some of the most influential include Angelaki, Journal of the Theoretical Humanities, Camera Obscura with its focus on feminism, culture and media studies, and Continuum, Journal of Media and Cultural Studies. There's also Critical Studies in Media, Communication, Cultura and Differences, a journal of feminist cultural studies. Can you recall another group that made a major impact? Yes, journals that focused on global and transnational perspectives like Inter-Asia Cultural Studies, Public Culture and Open Cultural Studies. Others like Parallax, New Formations, Social Text, Space and Culture, and Theory, Culture and Society continued to connect literature, media, philosophy and politics. Together, these journals did something crucial. They expanded the horizons of cultural studies by integrating feminist, post-colonial and transnational perspectives while staying true to the core mission, understanding culture as a site of power, ideology and identity.